For those who don't know me, my name is Joe. I'm the manager of the Aquaculture Information Exchange. We are a NOAA and USDA backed online platform for the American aquaculture community. And part of what we do is host webinars like this one that give a platform for our members to share their expertise. And today we have Maxim, who's with a company called Aquasafra. And the the pitch is candid conversation on producer profitability when it comes to finfish. Um, and yeah, I think it's whenever we get an opportunity to have more conversations about finfish, those are welcome. So Maxim, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
All right. How's the screen share there, Joe? Okay.
Looks good.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Joe. Thank you to the exchange and some others that were involved in putting this together. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about kind of the U.S. finfish side. Of course, this is a tilapia hatchery, so we'll be a little bit tilapia tunnel visioned on the presentation, but and Florida tilapia specifically because we're the outdoor versus the RAS environments are a little bit different, but we'll try our best to cover a few different things. And again, like Joe said, the title is Pathway to Profitability, or really kind of talk about this elusive idea of producer profitability, because the producer often gets overlooked in the aquaculture space, and certainly in tilapia culture, it's no exception. The other component of this is about the genetics groups or hatcheries taking a little bit more responsibility for that producer profitability. So just to kind of set the program for what we're going to talk about, I'm going to give a little bit of context, both personally where I'm coming from, also professionally what Aquasafra is and what Aquasafra has been in the U.S. aquaculture industry and tilapia specifically. We'll talk a little bit about sort of our ethos around producer profitability, why that's a little bit different, and we'll try to see if we can define kind of what producer profitability is. And I would encourage you all as we go through this, if you guys could think, about what producer profitability is for you, because if you're thinking it's about growing finfish or growing tilapia, it's unfortunately that's just not the case. We have to remember that we're in the money growing business, not the fish growing business. And so yeah, who's responsible for some of that profitability? Again, I'll be arguing in this presentation that genetics groups and hatcheries bear a lot of that responsibility, and that Aquasafra, specifically in the supply chain of Florida tilapia, needs to assume a lot of that responsibility. And then what does the future look like? What are some future applications for this sort of mindset, this sort of idea about assuming a little bit more responsibility for producer profitability? So some personal context for me. I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay. That was kind of my getting hooked on seafood and aquaculture in general. When you're growing up in these sorts of waterman towns, it's really you can't help but get kind of sucked into how the oyster fisheries are, the crab fisheries, the blue crab fisheries that year, Chesapeake Bay menhaden or striped bass, whatever different species are coming into season at that point. You get kind of sucked in because that's how these communities live and die every year is by the run of the fisheries. And so getting involved, that was kind of my introduction to seafood. I went to the University of South Carolina, graduated 2020, which of course, for those of you who are doing math on that, yeah, that was the COVID year. So I was going to work with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources as an intern with their sort of public hatchery program, and then I was going to work for them full time in their public hatchery program. Both of those things were unfortunately canceled, and I figured, well, I don't want to work for the government anyway, and I really wanted to get more into food fish or private food fish. And that's where I moved down to Florida in 2021. And I've been involved in Florida tilapia ever since. I did take a brief hiatus with Global Seafood Alliance in 2023, 2024. Again, looking at a few different seafood projects with them, but always was kind of half involved with Florida tilapia. And I've come back down here to be the general manager of Aquasafra. And what is Aquasafra? Well, Aquasafra is the sort of oldest and largest tilapia hatchery in the United States. we've had isolated genetic lines here since the mid 80s. I think the hatchery was officially incorporated in 1991. Um, we are by far the largest producer if you just look at, fingerlings for grow out, not necessarily on the broodstock side, but just fingerlings for grow out. I mean, we're really set up to produce and sell about 10 million fingerlings per year, and we try to sell those at about a gram. We have, again, from the mid 80s, early 90s, 47 generations of genetic progress. So it's really, quite a long cultured history. Certainly in the tilapia space, that's a huge number. And again, we're the white tilapia group. So if you think in your head about traditional Nile tilapia, and you've got sort of a dark fish image in your head, or kind of grayish, or even red, your red tilapia, that's not what we do. We are white tilapia hatchery. We sell an Nauticus aurea hybrid. So we're playing off hybrid vigor. We're playing off a few different genotypic and phenotypic strategies with that cross that we can get into later if people want to know a little bit more about that. White tilapia is a thing in the United States because of the live markets and really the Cantonese, Chinese, Americans that started buying tilapia in the late 90s, or kind of mid 90s, I guess, and into the 2000s. And that sort of culture and a cultural preference for a white tilapia was the benchmark for that industry. So that's how we ended up with a white tilapia. And again, we've selected for that now, but certainly, that the origin is really a market-based origin in terms of consumer preference. This is what the hatchery looks like. I like this photo. This is after Hurricane Milton, so there's just stuff everywhere. You can see our roofs are basically imploded, but we're on just about 3 acres of land here in Manatee County, Florida, or Bradenton if you're looking for a town name. And again, you can see some of the different tank setups. We have some indoor environments, some outdoor environments, but Southwest Florida is really a great place to grow tilapia environmentally. So producer profitability, and what does that look like? How do we define that? How can we think about this, at least in the finfish and tilapia space? So I'm going to put that in sort of 3 pillars. We're going to focus on really pillar number 1, because as I'm going to get into in a second, that's really what a hatchery can control. And again, I'm going to argue that hatcheries and genetics groups need to take more responsibility in controlling those things. But really, we're going to look at the input side. So the genetics inputs, and of course, and on the feed side, which is not something traditionally thought of when you think about genetics, but and hatcheries. But that's kind of my main point here. There are some other things, of course, that are relevant that to each individual property or producer or farm or environment. Of course, farm management techniques, whether that's culturing, technical knowledge, the marketability of your products, what your sales program looks like. All of those things obviously are extremely important in producer profitability. But in finfish aquaculture, pillar number 1 there, and the inputs in terms of genetics and feeds is a huge percentage of your overall cost structure. And so, how can a hatchery affect that? How can a hatchery work with producers to lower their operating costs? Well, that's really what Aquasafra's ethos is, and that's some things that we've changed down here in Florida. So I'm going to throw up some numbers, and we're going to go through a little bit of data. So just bear with me, and then we can kind of talk a little bit more about this and have a bit more fun from just a conversational perspective. But so if you look at the pie chart on the left, this is sort of an open air farm, so not RAS specific. So you don't have your, sort of some of your RAS input and input costs and oxygen and some other things. Again, we can get into that if we want to later. But for our tilapia guys down here in Florida, and certainly for some of these other finfish producers, and again, if you are a finfish producer in Florida and you want to come at me a little bit later with some different numbers, that's fine. But these are pretty generalized. Certainly they work for tilapia, but they have some application in pretty much most finfish species here in Florida. Well, look at your feed costs. I mean, 66% of your costs and feed is just a huge number. And again, I think genetics groups and hatcheries need to take a little bit more responsibility of helping producers navigate that number. That's just a huge percentage of your overall cost structure. You can see genetics, or what you're investing in, whether that's broodstock and being your own hatchery, or buying fingerlings, or buying genetics from another group, is a very small percentage of your overall cost structure, right? About 6%. And so, again, traditionally, genetics and sort of your costs of bringing in genetics or running your own genetics side, if you know, or your own hatchery is really not thought of as a particularly large cost percentage, and that's true. But I think it should be a little bit more when you look at the feed side. And then again, we can look at other costs, energy costs, labor costs, miscellaneous costs in terms of maintenance and facility upkeep. Those are things that a hatchery definitely cannot control. We cannot control, what you need to pay your employees. We cannot control what the price per kilowatt hour is of electricity here in Florida, or how depreciated your system is and what your maintenance costs are. And then moving over to the right side again, RAS, your costs are going to be fairly similar, but you're going to be more efficient from a food conversion perspective. So your feed costs are going to come down, but your total input costs are going to go up, right, when we bring oxygen and other things into play. So again, this is not a RAS, bigging up RAS webinar. I mean, we can get into some of that if we want to. Certainly, again, for those of you in the north, you're looking at this RAS chart, like where's the heating costs? Again, this is really more of a Florida focused thing. And we're also assuming that there's no CapEx costs here from a debt perspective. Everything is really handled through equity, and that's just something that most of our Florida farmers down here have. There's really not a lot of CapEx debt or anything like that. Everything is pretty much done through equity. So again, we can get more technical on the economics and breakdown of the percentages if we need to, but I think we can kind of just skirt around that for now. So uh, again, so this is the percentages again of the same pie charts that we were just looking at, and I've highlighted the two yellow columns here, so or two yellow rows. So again, feed and genetics. And on an outdoor farm environment, that number is totaling 73% of your costs. Again, that's just a huge, huge, huge number. So you're looking at like, okay, how can we be more profitable, or how can a producer be profitable? Where you get the most out of 73% of your costs from an efficiency perspective, I'd say you're on the right path. And then, okay, the RAS number is a little bit lower, but still, over half of your costs on the feed side and on the genetics, and probably 44% is probably a low number on feed, but we'll just go with that. So what does that look like in terms of taking responsibility for these two things? So first, let's just talk genetics. And genetics is again, so this is the 6.4% number. So I'm not going to actually spend as much time on that because I think people are pretty familiar with the traditional ways that genetics programs or hatcheries market themselves and the sort of traits that we need to look at from a genotypic or phenotypic perspective. And I'll touch a little bit on what we look for at Aquasafra with tilapia. So the first thing is resistance over immunity. Immunity, unfortunately, is like one of the kind of the great sort of misleading descriptions from a sort of resistance or hardiness perspective or a survivability perspective of a genetics program. Immunity has been chased by a lot of different groups over the years across a multitude of different species and just hasn't really worked very well. The main reason for that is that immunity comes from lab-based selections, and farms aren't labs, and bacteria and viruses never stop mutating. So if you're selecting for immunity for a pathogen in a lab environment, what we've seen, especially in the tilapia side over the last 4 years, is that those fish break with those lines in farming environments. And the reason for that is that those fish, which were selected for immunity in lab-based conditions, turns out, well, they're not immune when other parameters aren't lab-based conditions. So again, farms aren't labs, and so oxygen is not going to be perfect. Temperature thresholds are going to be broken, and so water quality, ammonia, nitrogen numbers are going to be high and low. pH can swing wildly on different farms. We're not going to go into all the different ways that fish can get stressed, but as soon as you start stacking stressors on the immune system of a tilapia or other finfish, suddenly the immunity that you thought you had in a lab doesn't hold true. And because you've chased the immunity route, your fish probably aren't as resistant overall as they should be. And so what we've done at Aquasafra is really not gone down the immunity route, but really focused on breeding for resistance. So we put our fish under a lot of stress, wild temperature swings, really low oxygen numbers. We crank up the nitrogen numbers in our tanks, and we select our fish through that. And so if your fish aren't dead on paper, or if our fish aren't dead on paper, we just don't select those to continue in our broodstock program. So we really try to put our fish under a lot of stress. That's not sort of the modern hipster way to look at genetics, but we certainly think it's the most uh, guaranteed results. I mean, getting to market is by far the most important parameter if you're a finfish producer. Second, efficiency over speed. This is another one in tilapia that really is kind of overhyped. So if we go back to these numbers, um, growth rates are not really that important as you can see, right? So if you're in a RAS system and you've got a little bit higher energy costs, so energy, and then you've also got oxygen, growth rate really matters because you need the fish to get through the system quickly because your costs on that side are a lot higher. If you're in an outdoor farm, uh, growth rates really is kind of labor and energy. Those are much smaller sort of input cost profile. So we can all go, and I'm sure you all know this, but we can all go to your farms, each of your farms right now with tilapia or any other species, and we can all set growth records, but we're not going to make any money doing it. And so the focus of the producer has to be in what does it cost to produce a pound of fish, not how fast can you grow the fish, right? So as I kind of hinted at in the introduction of the presentation, if your approach to finfish aquaculture or to tilapia culture is that you're in the fish growing business, we really need to kind of think about what that actually means because you're not in the fish growing business, you're in the money making business, you're in the money growing business. And so, how fast you grow the fish, okay, that's important, but it's a much smaller it's much lesser in terms of significance than other factors are, and so you really need to look at efficiency as opposed to growth rate. And again, that's a very non-traditional way to look at it from a genetics perspective, because most hatcheries, most genetics groups really are trying to tell you that their fish are going to grow faster than any fish has ever grown before, fastest growing fish ever, best So those sorts of things, if the efficiency isn't there, if the FCR isn't there, it's really not, growth rate in vacuum is really not what we need to be looking at. And then marketability over everything. We talked about why Aquasafra has white tilapia. That's a market preference. And so if you can't sell your product, then obviously it doesn't work. But we're not talking as much about the market side right now. So again, so we looked at genetics, 6% of your costs. Let's look at feed now. So again, this is a huge
Maxim,
number. We
actually,
talked.
before we get into feed, Dave, did
Sure.
you have your hand raised? Did you have a question?
I'll ask him at the end.
Okay, perfect. All right, sorry about that, Maxim.
No, that's fine. Uh, so again, so look at these feed numbers. And again, so efficiency over speed. So food conversion ratio. This is by far the most important number. So if you're spending 66% or 44% of your overall costs on feed, then you need to make sure you're getting the most out of that. And so food conversion ratio is just incredibly important. And then we can start getting into some other things. So this kind of gets into what Aquasafra is doing here in Florida to help its producers. So the first is, again, FCR. So we really focused our genetics program on selecting for fish that can perform on lower cost, lower protein diets efficiently. And so for a producer, feed costs are all tied in with your macronutrient levels, right? So, 36% protein diet is going to cost more than the 32%. 40 is going to cost more than 36, and so on. Pellet size has something to do with that as well. The smaller the pellet, the harder it is for a feed mill to move product through their line, so those costs are typically higher. But putting that aside for a second, we need, as it's my belief, it's Aquasafra's belief that the genetics firm, in this case us, or the hatchery, in this case us, needs to assume responsibility for the producer of putting a fish on their farm that can grow on lower cost feeds. Because again, if we market ourselves as the fastest growing tilapia of all time, but that tilapia requires a 50% protein diet to grow, then the producer's not going to make any money, even if he's setting growth records. So uh, performance on low cost, low protein diets super, super important. The other thing that we've done here in Florida, and this is pretty cool, is we've built a feed supply chain for a lot of our producers. Again, one of the limiting factors for a producer in terms of cost, especially on the feed side, is how much volume can you buy? Can you buy full trucks of feed directly? So can you buy 22 tons at a time? Can you afford to have 44,000 pounds of feed in inventory and not have the cash for that available to you, to meet other operating needs? So what we've done at Aquasafra is that we have inventoried feed for producers and allowed them to purchase feed at smaller volumes so that there's not as much money tied up in inventory costs. And this has really helped a lot of our smaller producers out, especially who historically have not been able to purchase full trucks of feed. So we've basically set up a purchasing program to allow those smaller producers to purchase feed as if they were a larger farm, but then not be punished when they only buy a smaller amount at a time. And so that saved them on shipping costs because we're only going to ship full trucks of feed to the hatchery, and that's also saved them on sort of overall budgeting costs where they don't have to tie up as much money in inventory and they have a little bit more money to spend in other operational needs. So that's been really, really important. And then again, the R&D part of genetics and feeds combined is something that really hasn't been looked at before, at least certainly in tilapia culture. And so what we're doing is genetic selections for a specific line of feed and then offering that line of feed to producers. Again, this is sort of an exclusive deal that we've got here in Florida, but it's really working well to help producers lowering their operating costs. And then again, on the feed formulation side, well, again, we've got 47 generations now of genetic progress. I mean, Aquasafra is pretty aware of what is needed to produce its own fish. And to say that any general warm water finfish diet or any general tilapia diet is the best diet to grow Aquasafra tilapia, again, is not correct. And it's not the producer's responsibility to know that. That's on the hatchery, that's on the genetics firm. And so we are uniting those things together. So we're making formulation changes on the feed side to fit our genetic profile, and we're adjusting our genetic profile to meet what we want to do on the feed side. And again, we want to get into lower cost diets. We want to get into lower protein diets. We want to look at some different ingredients that are going to lower operating costs for producers. If we can't lower producers' operating costs, and we're not doing a very good job as a company. And so what does this actually look like? Well, on the producer profitability side, down here in Florida, we got some pretty gaudy numbers going now through our program. So production costs really should be about $1.50 a pound to produce if you are an outdoor Florida farmer in the tilapia space. Now, we don't have all of our tilapia farmers operating at that level yet, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done from a water management and a farm management perspective, and kind of upping our technical knowledge and figuring out a way to produce most efficiently with the staffs that we have. But we're selling at $3 a pound. And so, that's literally 100% return is just fantastic. And the market right now is really underserved. So we're seeing a lot of growth in that space. So really the economics that we've been able to produce or to provide for our producers are just fantastic. And so that scales, right? So what's the scale though for the industry? Profitability sells, right? So how do we grow the industry? There's a lot of conversations about U.S. aquaculture in general, and the struggles that really everyone is having. Well, here in South Florida, at least, our producers are at least have the input costs and the market available to make a lot of money. We've got to get a little bit better about our culturing techniques, but on paper, we're extremely profitable, and that profitability is the best seller for other people looking to get into the industry, or people looking to invest money in aquaculture, or looking for areas that are profitable at this level. So we can certainly offer that. And then again, for Aquasafra, again, as an American aquaculture company, right, how do we grow our business? Well, again, integrating traditional genetics with feed and improving those profitability numbers, that allows Aquasafra to further integrate into the tilapia supply chain, which is important. And it's a completely unique sales pitch for us when we speak with producers, because we're not really speaking anymore about our fish grow faster than their fish, or this fish is better than that fish. It's a conversation about making money. And so again, if there's one thing that I hope to convey from this short webinar, it's that U.S. finfish production, or any finfish culture, this could probably extend out to the shellfish side as well. I'm just not as familiar with that industry. You're just not in the fish growing business. You're in the money making business, and tilapia is a commodity product. It's got to be the cheapest fish in the market, and we have to have that mentality in production. So this is all about how to lower costs to produce. How can we produce 1 pound of tilapia for as low as possible, and the responsibilities that a genetics group can take in that. So that was the program. Give you some context on us in the business. We talked a little bit about our ethos about assuming responsibility and for producer profitability here in Florida, and talked a little bit about how that scales both the industry and our company. And so that's that. I try to keep it short. It's 25 minutes. I don't know how long people have. I'm certainly happy to take any questions. This is my contact information if you want to send me an email. Or if you're going to call me, my cell number is probably the best option to reach me. If you have any specific questions about Florida tilapia or Aquasafra or any parts of our program, I'm an open book. Our website is there. We're in the middle of kind of upgrading that now, so don't judge us too harshly on the website side. And yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Perfect. Thanks, Maxim. That was really great. I know that I've heard a lot about, the cost of feed across the board, not just with finfish being a major issue with American aquaculture right now. So hearing some of your ideas on that was helpful. But yeah, we can go ahead and get into some questions. Right. Just before I do that, though, I just wanted to bump once again that we have a virtual job fair coming up next Wednesday at 12 p.m. We have 8 top employers across the U.S. who are going to be there, focused mainly on entry-level aquaculture positions. So yeah, please come out to that if you'd like. But yeah, Dave, we can go ahead and get started.
Okay, I have 2 questions. One is related to the numbers that you put up on feed. I don't know if you can just simply go back to that. My
Sure.
experience, and it goes back as far as the 1960s. Go to the next slide. We used tilapia before it became a yuppie food around the world, primarily to control vegetation in open ponds. Tilapia generally are a herbivorous type of species, and that certainly helps with the plant protein, largely from a soy basis, to decrease the cost of manufacturing the feed. My question here is on your outdoor farms, presumably these are ponds or something similar, the feed costs actually should be lower than in a recirculating system. The primary reason is that these fish can feed on vegetation around the edge of the pond. Why is there so much difference between the data that you've got there?
Sure. So that's a great question, and the best answer for that is intensive versus extensive production. And here in South Florida, our outdoor producers are all growing at intensive densities. They're not ultra intensive like you would see in a RAS environment, but they're certainly more intensive than would allow for plant growth to sort of regenerate and to provide a boost from an FCR perspective. So, our producers down here are growing probably anywhere between 0.15 and 0.3 pounds per gallon. And that's just a density that is far too high for regenerative plant growth to play the kind of impact in sort of an FCR that you're talking about. There are some producers that are trying to maintain biofloc systems, but that's really hard to maintain in an outdoor environment because as soon as the wind blows, as soon as the rain falls, you lose control pretty rapidly of your specific bacteria cultures that you're cultivating. Although a well-run biofloc system could certainly provide enough of a protein boost to lower your FCR number. So the result of that, David, is that total FCR numbers are actually higher in an outdoor environment here in South Florida than they would be in a recirculating system.
Okay, thanks. The other question, totally unrelated to that. Unfortunately, one of the biggest handicaps all of aquaculture has is disease outbreak. What I'm meaning here is primarily infectious disease.
Sure.
Tilapia are no exception, nor is any of your productions an exception to this. Do you have any estimates of how much you might spend or what proportion is spent? And I'm going to call it generally veterinary services. That includes any drugs, therapeutics, personnel, and stuff like that.
So that's a great question, and I'll answer that in a couple of different ways. First of all, I'm going to take a shot at the state of Florida here, whose outreach and extension service for our tilapia producers is absolutely disgraceful. and they're totally on their own, getting zero public support whatsoever. So that's point number one. Point number two, again, the hatchery. This is where I think the hatchery can actually assume a lot of responsibility. One thing that we provide off our hatchery is a fully vaccinated uh, tilapia fingerling for all three lines of Streptococcus. INEA 1A, 1B, and or no, Strep Agalactiae 1A, 1B, and then Strep INEA. So we vaccinate twice for all those um, for all those bacterias. We use an immersion vaccination program with a pretty good adjuvant. So we've had really nice results with that. And so, that's a cost that I think the hatchery can absorb, and to try to reduce, again, costs for the producer, because I think what you're getting at, David, is that it's really hard for the producer to maintain those costs. So I would agree with that. The second part is that, again, through our feed program, this is actually something that we're, um, well, it, it's it you know hand it's really hard because in Florida our extension service is so poor. It's really hard for producers in a timely manner to um, identify a problem, have a vet come out, diagnose it, manufacture a medicated feed, and then feed a fully integrated medicated feed. So what producers end up doing is using sort of broad spectrum antibiotics and top coating feed, which is a very inefficient and very expensive process. So the long and short of it is that the hatchery, and again, this is something that Aquasafra is pretty unique with, needs to take responsibility for that, both from a resistance perspective and also through vaccination program, and to try to reduce as much cost as you can on the producer. And then the second part is that if the producer doesn't have public support in terms of vets, extension services, awareness of biosecurity, it doesn't really matter anyway. So that's something that we're struggling with here in Florida. A lot of our producers are Hispanic producers. They speak only Spanish. We have begged and pleaded with the state of Florida to hire someone who speaks Spanish. They have not. And so there's really no option for them to even communicate.
Cool. Thanks. Thanks, Dave, for your questions. Uh, Anybody else? Feel free to raise your hand or drop the questions in the chat for Maxim. One question that I had, Maxim, while we're waiting for other people to ask theirs, is like a lot of your commentary was specific to Florida, but I'm curious. You did outline like a lot of like where these problems exist as far as like the supply chain, et
Sure.
cetera. But I was wondering, at the national scale, what do you think is the one lever that could be pulled differently to solve some of these problems?
Yeah, I think to link it back to David's question, I think a lot of this is state specific, right? So what does your regulatory program look like? What does your extension service program look like? So you've got other states, North Carolina, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, that have done really, really great jobs with their extension service programs. And these are areas that traditionally have a much sort of larger history of aquaculture, right? So you think about, American catfish, for example, in the southern United States. So that part just has to come from state level. The federal side, again, we still have too many overlapping jurisdictions there to really make it work federally, and until such time where the federal government is willing to subsidize production in some way, it's going to be impossible to compete internationally, right? So you look at your areas on the finfish side, like your Vietnams or your other areas. Those are areas where the government is subsidizing a huge amount of feed costs. So it's like you can't really compete with that on a national level. So how can we grow the industry in Florida? How can we grow the live fish industry with tilapia, right? So the first is making the industry and these producers profitable, and we've certainly done that we've taken a big step towards that in the last 7 or 8 months since we've kind of launched this program. We've probably dropped producers' feed costs by 20%. Growth numbers continue to creep up with some of our genetics programs. We've got a lot more exciting genetic stuff on the near horizon. So the first is making the industry profitable and trying to attract money organically into the industry. And U.S. aquaculture needs some wins here. And, outside of the oyster shellfish groups, there's not really anyone making any money. I mean, the feed guys are making some money. Genetics companies, certain species, I think, are making some money. The tilapia guys, not so much. But it's really hard to, generate growth in an industry or even build momentum in an industry if it's not really profitable. And profitable at producer level here, because that's the big thing with the United States. We can grow tilapia for a similar price point to what you can grow, in other countries, but you just can't do anything with it afterwards, right? So it's just about getting to the point where producers and small scale producers are able to be profitable in the live space. And then again, the live space traditionally in tilapia, there's a lot of room for expansion because this was again built originally in Cantonese Chinese communities, and so still a huge percentage of the live market space is in through Chinatowns in your metro Northeast, and there are a lot of other ethnic groups in the United States and even American Americans that like tilapia, and these markets just haven't been developed at all. And so there's a lot of room for growth, but it's all going to come in through sort of non-traditional ways, at least with respect to tilapia.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll open it up again to anybody. And yeah, if you're not in Finfish, don't be afraid to ask any questions. Beginner questions are welcome as well.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and ask a question about
Sure.
consumer preference. So, you mentioned that like tilapia, a certain kind of tilapia is more appealing to probably restaurants and consumers than another. What are some like best ways to get that preference information and just kind of learn about what's trending so you can know what to start farming?
So that's a great question. And the first answer to that is going to be product form. So, what's the finished product looking like for your farm? So again, here in the U.S., all of our tilapia producers are really selling a live fish, and if it's not live, it's in a whole fish space. So that's where external color really matters. If you're going to your grocery store or your seafood market and you're buying a tilapia fillet, it really doesn't matter if it came from a white tilapia, a Nile tilapia, a red tilapia, because you're not seeing that. So a deep skin fillet is going to remove the skin. So and every fillet is the same. Now I would argue that with a white tilapia, you can fillet it and leave the skin on, and that changes your filleting economics completely because you're saving another 3 or 4% of your biomass by doing that. But if we putting that aside, it's really product form first. So what's the product form look like, and that will tell you if there's going to be any consumer preference at all. The second part of that is unfortunately there's really not a lot of great data on a lot of species because in the United States there's such a large percentage of sort of, I don't know what the right word is to call it, seafood fraud, where depending on what species you are, it's really being marketed as a different species, and so a lot of your feedback just isn't quite right, especially if you're trying to look at things sort of at a national level or look at how you compete with an international market. So end product form first, like what does the end product look like? And then the second option is probably if you're developing for yourself, ideally a local market, you've just got to hit the streets and walk the marketplaces, go into seafood markets, meet store owners, tell your story. U.S. aquaculture sells itself. The stigma out there is really not a real one at consumer level. I mean, it is a real one at consumer, but it's not enough to dissuade consumers from buying your product, and it's certainly at consumer level not nearly to the extent that it is in the media.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Barrett. Who else has a question for Maxim? We have about 15 more minutes left.
So would
go ahead, Barrett.
this is a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So since there's not a lot of data available on these consumer preferences and stuff right now, is that something that private firms need to address, or is that something that needs to be dealt with, like with regulation or, the state?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So again, I think step one of that is making the industry itself profitable, and that allows money to be spent on these sorts of things from within the industry itself, whether that's Aquasafra in the tilapia space or other things. Like if Aquasafra was more profitable, that's exactly the kind of thing that we would be spending money on. And the channels that which the vast majority of our product flow through are, again, Chinese seafood marketplaces that are not. Let's just say you're not going to get public data on that. Some of that is pretty. It's not exactly off the books, but it's also not being built on from a traceability perspective, right? So there's a lot of conversations now in the federal space about seafood traceability and how do we trace growth and processing through a variety of Asian countries, and how does that make its way into a U.S. marketplace? None of this has been looked at on the U.S. side at all. So really, it's making the industry profitable. And when you look at historically, the main U.S. Aquaculture products, there actually is great data. There's great data on U.S. catfish. There's great data on U.S. shellfish production and sales. Those industries are very well documented, and there's a lot of conversation about how to make those industries competitive with foreign products, et cetera. So a lot of that comes with success and comes with people caring, right? The U.S. catfish industry is probably, I mean, it's down. It's probably 300 million pounds a year right now. That's enough product to make people care, and there's enough money in 300 million pounds of fish to spend on marketing, spend on other services. The other part of this, and this is again something that's been the kind of the forefront of discussion, is marketing campaigns for U.S. Seafood and aquaculture. There's not been centralized marketing, and again, if industries, no matter how big or small they are not profitable enough to market themselves, again, that's a huge limiting factor on their own growth, right? So U.S. tilapia may be, I don't know the number, maybe 20 million pounds a year, but it's scattered all over the place in different states. There's a lot of that is cross country on the West Coast versus Florida versus some Midwest recirc environments, right? Those are not all selling into the same channels. They're not selling in through formal processes where you have sort of a defined supply chain and traceability. And so, the marketing side of that is lagging as well.
Okay, and then lastly, besides marketing and bilingual workers, what are some other things that are not tapped into right now for the industry?
So in Florida, by far the biggest limiting factor is there's two limiting factors for tilapia in Florida. Maybe three. One is state support. There's just no getting around that. Again, Aquasafra and other groups can really make the industry profitable, but if you're not getting state support, then it doesn't really matter. That goes beyond David's question of treating for disease outbreaks, because ideally we're not breaking with disease in the first place. But in terms of biosecurity controls and regulations, there are rules that have been written in the state of Florida for a lot of these things that aren't being followed. They're not being followed not because the producers are deliberately not following them, because they don't know what they are. And there's just a complete disconnect in Florida tilapia between the state and the producer. That's number one. The second part is that we grow here probably 15 million pounds, 10 to 15 million pounds of tilapia a year in the state of Florida, and almost all of that leaves the state. It's trucked up to New York City, it's Toronto, Chicago. That's going some out, goes out to Texas, Boston, DC. Floridians like tilapia. So I mean, you're spending, there's thousands, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably more than that, that's being paid to haul fish out of the state. That's money that leaves the industry. That's not staying in the producers' pockets. That's not going into the retailers' pockets, and the consumer isn't able to benefit from that because you're stacking that money on, then it's leaving the state. So we need to develop more of the market here in Florida. There's so much opportunity. We just haven't gotten around to doing that yet. And all of the product right now still sells through traditional channels from the 90s, which are not that they don't work, they do work, but there's a lot of money that's leaving the industry hauling fish from Florida to New York City.
Mm.
Thanks,
Okay,
Barry.
thank you.
Yeah, that's all super interesting. I do have another question, which is, I think part of what intrigued me when you originally pitched this webinar, Maxim, was the sort of like tough love approach that you're taking towards talking about profitability and like what other hatcheries and genetics companies can do better. So I'm wondering, in the context of you talking about how, the industry needs to be stronger, and I hear other people talk about this, like at RazTech conference that I just went to not too long ago.
Sure.
Someone there opening up the reception said, I don't see you as competitors, I see you as colleagues, and in the spirit of, building industry unity. But I'm just curious, yeah, why you decided to take that approach, and what your thoughts are on building unity in the industry.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of there's a lot of groups that it's what's the I guess my question is what's the end goal of a company? And I think what we're doing is definitely not like if you talked about through just a business only perspective, what I just said is like completely backwards. Which is you focus on your own product, not the user that's sort of using it, not the end consumer, not the supply chain, not a lot of these other things. You just focus on your product, you make it the best that you can, and you move on. What we have seen, again, this is going to be a very Florida tilapia specific response. Although you can apply this actually to a lot of international tilapia because I think it's very similar. There's just a level of support that's needed in order to make a lot of your small and medium scale producers more profitable, because a lot of the industry traditionally is built around these kind of mega farm projects, and those projects really haven't worked out globally, but a lot of the industry is still built around. That's how a lot of the feed mills are built. A lot of the genetics groups, probably Aquasafra included, traditionally built around trying to figure out how to support, a mega farm project through broodstock programs and some other things. And that as the industry kind of focuses on, and again, RazTech is a good example of this because there's a lot of talk about build smaller, right? And sort of more, local markets, small, medium scale producers. We're seeing this a lot out of country as well. It's not just, and it's not just RAS, and it's not just in the United States. These sorts of, it's just kind of a shift, I think, from economically, and kind of with how you need to support some of these groups. And again, we don't have to do any of those things. The industry here in Florida or here in the United States was profitable before that now, but it certainly wasn't where we now have it, and it certainly wasn't on a path to success the way I think that it will be. And so it's just sort of a mindset. It's not. I don't think that there's anything wrong with just being a genetics group or just being a hatchery and kind of being in a vacuum and just looking at your product through that lens and like how does it perform on paper and you're just focused on that. But that's just not how we want to do business. And again, it's just an ethos thing for Aquasafra. And so I think with some of the different markets, I think it's worked all out okay, right? Like what I was just talking about, the lack of state support here in Florida in the tilapia space, like the producers need a bit more help here in an area where you have a lot better support. I think something like what I'm talking about is probably a bit more redundant. If you're pitching a huge mega farm project, what I'm talking about doesn't really work because you have the resources available in-house to address a lot of these things. But if you're talking about isolated industries that are built around small and medium scale producers, the economics that you face are really hard. And I think it's crying out for someone to step up. And I think hatcheries or genetics firms are as well placed to address that as anyone.
Thanks. Yeah. All very interesting. Anybody else have a question before we wrap up here? While we're waiting, I'm gonna drop the AIE YouTube in the chat, which is where we'll upload the recording of this, as well as our AIE webinars group, which I'll also drop the link to. No one else has a question. I will close out by asking, you're talking about government support, Maxim. I was curious what y'all's experience was with the hurricane relief programs that Florida had.
It's another great example. I think we've talked about we talked a little bit about overlapping jurisdictions, right? And so you've got there's a lot of federal relief money through USDA, through some other things, FEMA money. There's Florida, Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services, FDACS, here in the state is who handles a lot of that for the state. But if you aren't engaged with the producers, like the producers here don't apply for financial relief after hurricanes. They don't know that these things exist, right? So there's a lot of things that tilapia in Florida has to deal with that's just not succinct with growing the industry at a rate. Because, and again, it's not that those monies aren't being made available. It's that there's literally no way for a lot of our producers to find out what resources and what options they have. The state, in other states, there's producer meetings, there's efforts to get out and meet the farmers and make them aware, teach them what options they have financially to overcome environmental challenges. And that's not even just hurricanes, right? This past January we had a record cold, that record cold snap here in the Southeast. We've had record heat problems in the past down here. These are also fall within categories for relief, and there is so much opportunity for monies available to go towards shade cloth for producers or for heating infrastructure potentially in other parts, not so much down here in South Florida. But that's just isn't a thing. And again, other states have done a much better job with this. North Carolina, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, like really nice job. I think there's more that can be done, but really nice job. I meet producers there. They know who their state outreach groups are. They know who their veterinarians are. They know what the process is to get fish tested or to get apply for relief if that's necessary. None of those things exist here in South Florida.
Fingers crossed we don't have too many hurricanes this year.
Fingers crossed. And again, like even for for our groups, right? Like what's for us here on the west coast of Florida, that's hitting home a bit more, right? We had 150
Mhm.
years really of no hurricane hits. Now we've had 4 in 3 years.
Right.
So again, where and that might not have been a problem in the past for producers to not have access to these sorts of support services because they weren't affected as much by environment, or weren't affected as heavily by some environmental impacts. But certainly once you have a physical oceanography trend of hurricanes into a certain area for whatever reason, the importance of those services becomes all the more important. So there's work this is again something that Aquasafra is going to really work on here heavily with the state over the next 12 months or so to be able to integrate a little bit better with the tilapia farming community.
Right on. Well, yeah, good luck with working with them. And yeah, hopefully y'all can get some more support
Out there.
for farmers. But yeah, thanks again, Maxim, for presenting. And thanks everybody for attending. And like I said, we'll have our virtual job fair next Wednesday. And then we are going to have a panel on the social dimensions of aquaculture the last Wednesday of the month on the 30th. So look forward to that. But I will wish you all a great rest of your week. Have a good one.